In 2004, on a frozen Arctic island where almost nothing survives, scientists pulled a slab of rock from the ground and immediately felt uneasy. What was embedded in it didn't look right. It wasn't quite a fish. It definitely wasn't a land animal. And according to everything they thought they knew, it shouldn't have been there at all. The fossil had scales, fins, and gills, but also a flat head, a neck, and something disturbingly familiar inside its fins. Bones arranged like a primitive wrist. Not a theory. Not an artist's impression. Real anatomy, locked in stone. At first glance, it looked like a mistake. And that was the problem. Because if this fossil was real, then the story of how life first walked onto land was about to change. What few people realize is that this fossil didn't appear overnight. Its story began long before 2004, buried not just in rock, but in forgotten museum drawers and half-read research notes. Similar fragments have been found before. Strange, incomplete, and easy to dismiss. Too fish-like for land, too advanced for the age they came from. For decades, these fossils sat quietly while science moved on, favoring cleaner explanations and simpler timelines. No one was looking for a creature like this, and when you're not looking for something, it's surprisingly easy to overlook it. It wasn't until a small team decided to search in the one place no one expected to hierarch it, that the pieces finally came together. And when they did, the fossils stopped being an oddity and started looking like a warning. When scientists tried to classify the fossil, nothing worked. If it was a fish, it was far too complex. If it was an early land animal, it was clearly not ready for land. It sat in an uncomfortable middle ground, a place most evolutionary models treated as a gap, not a destination. At the time, the transition from water to land was thought to be abrupt, almost clean. Fish here, amphibians there. This fossil refused that simplicity. Its anatomy suggested a slow, experimental process, full of half-steps and compromises. The creature wasn't evolving toward land the way textbooks suggested. It was adapting to shallow, hostile environments, swamps, mudflats, shrinking waters, and that subtle difference made scientists nervous. At first, the excitement focused on the big features, the fins, the skull, the shape of the body, but the real shock was hidden deeper, in the fine structure of the bones. When researchers finally examined the interior of the fins in detail, they froze. Inside were joints, not random fragments, but a clear sequence. Something like a shoulder, an elbow, and a primitive wrist. These weren't fins designed only for swimming. They were built to push against something solid. This wasn't a fish preparing to walk. It was an animal already capable of lifting itself up, pressing its body out of the water, even if only for moments. That single anatomical detail quietly erased a line scientists thought was absolute, and once it was seen, it couldn't be unseen. The moment that detail became undeniable, the mood shifted. This fossil wasn't filling a gap. It was exposing a mistake. For years, scientists had been asking the wrong question. They weren't looking at how life left the water, but how it learned to survive when water stopped being reliable. This creature didn't walk onto land in a dramatic leap. It tested it. Slowly. Awkwardly. And that meant the transition everyone had imagined was far more gradual and far messier. If you're enjoying uncovering discoveries like this, stay with the story. These moments where certainty collapses, or where science becomes truly fascinating. Because once this realization set in, the implications went far beyond a single fossil. Once the implications were clear, an uncomfortable question followed. If this fossil existed, how many others like it had been overlooked? The clean, linear model of evolution, water to land, step by step, started to feel artificial. Nature, it turned out, didn't follow diagrams. Textbooks described a decisive moment when fins became legs. This fossil erased that moment entirely. There was no sharp boundary, no single leap forward, just a long stretch of experimentation where survival mattered more than progress. The theory hadn't been wrong in spirit, but it was wrong in structure, and rebuilding it would take more than adding a footnote. It meant rethinking an entire chapter of life on Earth. What this fossil proved wasn't a missing link, but a missing mindset. It showed that evolution doesn't move in straight lines toward a goal. It adapts sideways, responding to pressure, scarcity, and chance. This animal wasn't becoming something else. It was surviving exactly where it was. The anatomy made that clear. Strong fins for pushing through shallow water, a flexible neck to hunt in tight spaces, lungs capable of breathing air when oxygen in the water ran low. Every feature pointed to an environment in flux. This wasn't the ancestor of land animals because it wanted to be. It was because the world around it kept changing. And that distinction changed how scientists interpret every transition that followed. Once this perspective took hold, its impact spread fast. Other fossils were re-examined. Old classifications were questioned. Creatures once labeled as failed experiments suddenly made sense in their own environments. Evolutionary dead ends weren't dead ends at all. They were adaptations to worlds that no longer exist. The ripple effect reached far beyond this one animal. It reshaped how scientists interpret mass extinctions, environmental stress, and even humanity's own origins. Survival, not advancement, became the central theme. And quietly, this fossil changed something deeper. It reminded science that the past isn't a clean story waiting to be read. It is a messy archive, and we're still learning how to interpret it. With this fossil at the center, timelines were redrawn. The move from water to land was no longer a single turning point, but a long overlap, millions of years, where life existed in between, adapting to instability rather than progress. Entire chapters of evolutionary history were reframed around environments, not milestones. School diagrams changed. Research papers shifted language. Even the question evolved. Instead of asking when animals conquered land, scientists began asking why water stopped being enough. That subtle shift rewrote more than a story about ancient life. It changed how we understand adaptation itself. And we'd at this fossil learned its place, not as a curiosity, but as a cornerstone of modern evolutionary science. Even now, this fossil doesn't close the story. It opens it. Scientists know what it could do, how it moved, and the kind of world it lived in, but they still don't. Do you know how common creatures like this were, or how many evolutionary paths simply vanished without a trace? For every fossil discovered, countless others were lost to erosion, pressure, or time itself. We also don't know how often life was forced into these in-between states, balancing between survival strategies that no longer exist today. The fossil record is silent on most failures, and quiet about experiments that never repeated. What we do know is this: the history of life isn't a straight line of progress. It's a series of responses to a changing planet. And this fossil, frozen in Arctic stone for 375 million years, reminds us that some of the most important moments in history weren't about moving forward. They were about not disappearing.